Have you ever been in an intimate relationship and lost a sense of who you are? You start to identify as the we of the relationship more than a sense of you. That can mean that we're really oversensitive to our partner's bad moods, stresses, anxieties, or even detox for those of you who know what that is in the frequency work context. And it just pulls our own mood and our own frequency resonance down. And for some, that sense of we is so strong that they're terrified of losing or ending the relationship because they'll have to face the me that they've lost along the way. So today I'm joined by my husband and partner, Chris, to talk about holding your space in intimate relationship from both the feminine and masculine perspective. We'll be discussing how to hold our space when we want to have a deeper sense of connection. We'll also talk about how we can be less affected by our partner's challenges and help to buoy them up and ourselves at the same time. And after the discussion, we get to the most important part of this episode. The group frequency calibration at the end is where the frequency work happens and where change actually occurs. So be sure to listen to that. Without releasing the distortion patterns targeted by the GFC, the change you want will be more difficult to attain because you haven't addressed the root of the issue. My name is Karen Cheong, and today in Mastering Your World Through Frequencies, we're discussing holding your space in intimate relationship. So a lot of people have the question, how do I hold my space in intimate relationship? I mean, it's really hard, right? Here you are being close to someone, you're also like intimate with them. Why do I want to hold my space with them, and how do I do that and have intimacy and connection? So it just seems like counterintuitive or counter possible or whatever you want to call it.
It's counter possible.
It's counter-possible. Anyway, you know what I'm saying.
I do know what you're saying.
Okay. So what's your, I mean, I guess maybe we should start with like, how do you feel like you were with holding your space in intimate relationship, or how did you view it before we started doing frequency work together?
I mean, before we started doing frequency work together, honestly, I didn't even really think about it. It wasn't even a thing that I had any awareness of. So I can only work with what I recall from back in those days. But I feel like I probably wasn't particularly good at holding my space back in the day. It just, again, I wasn't aware of it being a thing really. But looking back, I think I was really like always like really gauging how you were feeling, and you know, you obviously we've been together for 25 something years, so it's hard to remember what I was like even before that. I don't even know what I was like before that, but I mean, I was just a kid. But I think that I was very much like always like constantly gauging myself in relationship to you, to sort of figure out how things were in the world or something like that, as opposed to just like feeling more solid in myself and being more of like a observer of your state versus like a participant, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, my experience of you was that because you're a kind of person and you loved me, you were always trying to like fix like my bad state. So if I was having a problem, or I was cranky, or I was, you know, having a meltdown of some kind, or whatever it was that I was doing, or just even in a bad mood, you felt like part of your job was to fix me, right? To make me happier, to pull me out of that state, to whatever it was. And so I think it was harder for you to hold your space because you would do a lot to try to make me feel better. And I did the same thing with you. So I was always brought up to watch my parents, right? That's how I think we normally are raised.
I mean, they're our role models, right?
They're our role models. And my parents were always together.
Right.
All the time. They never did anything separate. And they really didn't have like each of them didn't have like their own set of friends they did stuff with or went off on their own adventures. They always did everything together.
Right.
And so it was interesting to watch my mom when my dad died, because she really didn't have a sense of her, and it was really hard for her because she didn't have like a sense of who she was.
Who am I? Yeah.
Was. And you know, at 70 plus years old, it was really difficult for her to like have a sense of, well, what do I want to explore now? What do I want to be? How do I want to be in life? And I saw her really struggle with that. Now, that's not just somebody whose partner who's passed that has a problem with that. I see that with people when they break up with somebody, you know, and the person isn't dead, but they've just moved on to someone else, so the relationship disintegrates for some reason. And then the person is left with, well, I don't have any sense of who I am because who I used to be was really about us.
Right.
So I feel like I sort of was like that too. I had this idea that we were supposed to always be together,
That is true.
do everything together, make each other happy. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
we're always filling in the spaces for each other. Like pull you out of your bad state or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so I learned from watching my parents that really it wasn't okay for me to hold my space, because it was like if you were detoxing or having some kind of anxiety or stress or whatever, like that I had to come into your space to share that emotion with you, because that was a way of showing compassion
Like
and
love or
love
something.
and closeness.
Yeah. But it's interesting because that can also veer into control as well.
Yeah.
Because that's something that used to happen where you were, I mean, it's not like this anymore, but at least at the beginning of our relationship, it's kind of like you talked about it for, just a second ago. It's like, it's almost like you were so focused on the we that it was hard to let me go off and do something on my own.
Yeah.
So it's like if I wanted to go on a motorcycle adventure somewhere, it might have been okay, but it also might not have been okay, because
Yeah.
it's like, well, what about you type of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there was that element of things as well, which can, like I said, veer into control, because you're so focused on the we that you forget that we're also individual I's that are having I experiences, but also we experience together,
Yeah,
right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And what was amazing is that I think from doing frequency work, what happened was it started to happen without us actually
intending
thinking
it.
about
Yeah,
it.
it just started to happen.
It just started to happen. So meaning
The it being which, just to
it
make it
being
clear.
becoming aware of our own space.
Right.
And not having a need to bleed into the other. And I'm speaking
Yeah.
for you, but at least for me, that's what it was. Like I didn't
it's for
feel
sure, it's
like I
true.
had to come into your space to like help you or feel close to you or feel connected to you or anything like this. It's sort
Yeah.
of, so whether you were happy or unhappy, there was less of a need for me to get in your business, so to speak,
Yeah, right.
you know, to like feel close to you. I could just be with you as you were having your experience.
Right. So what do you think, just to make it clear for folks, like when you say coming into my space, what does that really mean? Like what does that look like to you?
So to me, that means like the way I would describe it is like with my feeling sense, come close, like almost like wrap you in a hug.
Right.
Okay. I'm not actually touching you.
Right.
But it's kind of
It's
like
like
I'm
energetically
physically
in my
like,
business?
yeah, energetically feeling you up, energetically giving you a hug, you know, but in a way that you don't necessarily want to be. Not everybody wants to be hugged all the time.
Right. It's like the
right?
extra snug blanket. Maybe you just want like a nice blanket, but not like the super snug one.
Exactly. And part of that was my own insecurities about being
Right.
loved and being worthy and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And as I released my distortion patterns, I no longer needed to have that from you.
Exactly. Yeah.
So therefore, I didn't need to be in your space.
Right.
And I think it's really important. Something that I learned as a result of doing this work is that when I could hold my space, you were a lot happier. Because I
sure.
wasn't in, you know, you didn't have that extra tight blanket around you all
Right,
the
right,
time,
right.
That you were just like, it's getting hot, get off me. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
but it didn't feel bad to me that you were like, get off, you know, and I wasn't.
Well, because you weren't requiring that sense of like enmeshment or whatever it is in order to feel like secure in our relationship
Yeah.
and in your identity as an individual as well.
Yeah.
Right?
So I didn't need to do that in order to feel
Right.
like loved, basically.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have to have that like super closeness in order to
Yeah.
feel like, okay, well now he loves me, it's going to be
Right.
okay. And also what happened in my holding my space and raising my frequency resonance is that I addressed a lot of the low self-worth patterns that I had struggled with.
Yeah.
You know, which I'd watched from my parents about like, well, you know, if you aren't pleasing your partner, if they're
Yeah.
unhappy with you, if whatever, you're not like helping them in some way.
Yeah.
Not that you were weak and needed help, but I mean, like
Yeah,
kind of in
right.
their business though.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, then you're not being a good partner.
Right.
You know, you're not being a good wife, you're not being a good person, like you're supposed to be doing that.
Right.
And that masked that idea of what I
Mm-hmm.
just talked about, also masked my fear of losing you.
Right.
Okay, because I was sort of like, oh no, well if I lose Chris, then who's going to love me,
Right.
I mean, I know it's a fear that a lot of people are afraid to even express or don't
Right, don't even
necessarily.
know they have it
They don't
sometimes.
even know that they have it.
Yeah.
But it's a huge one.
For
you
sure.
know? It's like if you lose your partner, who the heck's going to love you?
Yeah. And that's for me, that's what was going on too. When I was overly concerned, like more than I ought to be about your state or your current condition or whatever
Or my
it is.
feeling state,
Your
yeah.
feeling state. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So I'd always be like, is everything I'm engaging? Is it okay? Is it okay? And in part, I think this one is this guy thing that tends to happen, which is guys want to fix stuff. So it's like there's that
totally true.
there's that sort of thing going on. Like, okay, I'm gonna Karen's like messed up right now. I'm gonna fix her. Which is, obviously I can't do that. It's not up to me. But that's just just like the energetic behind it.
Yeah.
And then there's also like the if I don't make you happy, then you might not stay with me or something. So there's definitely that element of things too. When people are running that insecurity where they feel like they need to feel that sense of love in order to feel good about themselves, which is different than wanting to feel the love just because it's really nice.
Exactly.
Right? Whereas like I feel like we're in a position more now where both of us individually are really more solid in ourselves. And so, I mean, I know that if something happened with you and you were no longer with me, I would be okay.
Yeah,
and
totally.
it's not that I wouldn't. I'd be super sad. I mean, it'd be horrible. But I would be okay. And I don't need you to be there in order for me to be complete. Right?
Yes, correct.
And that's a very different place to be in. And that doesn't mean that we can't be close and be super loving and all that. In fact, it's way better now that we're not trying to each like micromanage the other and be all in our business. So I want to make that clear to folks who are listening. Is it's not like now we're distant because we have this more inner stability for each of us separately. I in fact think that we're a much stronger couple now, and there's a different kind of closeness, which is like a more like mature isn't quite the right word, but like
wise, maybe.
Yeah, like a wiser closeness versus a clingy, needy, insecure, enmeshed closeness.
Yeah, which is
what most people see around them all the time. It's like what I see in movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I actually see that a lot when I work with people, and a lot of times, even on a spirit level, people are enmeshed. You know, so
you mean like actually frequency-wise,
their spirit bodies are overlapping in a way that's not good. Because the reason that's bad is because then it's very weak.
Yeah.
Because each person is like not strong on their own. They're just like collapsed into each other and in a false sort of bid for strength.
Right.
Does that make sense? It's like feels like it's really strong, but it's not. It's actually masking the weakness in each person.
Right.
So when you separate the people on spirit level, what happens, and I see this also with parents and children.
Yeah.
When you separate people on spirit level, the opportunity is it's not to punish the people, but actually for them to get stronger. Because obviously, if you have kids, you want them to be strong, happy individuals when they grow up, right? It's the same with your intimate partner. It's like, it's kind of like, I wish for you the same freedom that I have, right? That same wholeness, that same completeness, that same happiness that I have in myself that I get to share with you.
Right.
Not because I need to or you need to, but because we can.
It's so great to be able to do it.
And it's so much fun, and it's fulfilling, and it's amazing, and it's close, and it's intimate. And I would say that it takes out the fear.
Right.
Which is like a really big deal. So when you hold your space, although it's counterintuitive,
yeah,
the fear aspect drops because it's like then I don't fear losing you in the same way.
Well, I think I think the reason you can hold your space is because you're less afraid.
Yes.
The more afraid you are, the harder it is to hold your space, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So that they're kind of like intertwined, interrelated in that sense.
Yeah, and it's funny because, it's interesting, a lot of people who wish to have intimate partners will do this thing where they don't realize they're doing it, but they'll go right into the person's space.
So you mean people who wish to have partners but who currently don't?
Who currently don't, and have challenge with, with finding partners.
Yeah.
A dynamic that I see often is that they'll go, after a couple of dates where they're like, oh, I'm really attracted to this person. Even though they're physically not doing anything, energetically they did what I did, which was like the extra snuggly tight blanket. And the person, even though they can't articulate why it is they don't like it.
They don't really know what's going on at frequency level or like from that perspective. They just know like, ooh, I just feel like I'm being clamped down on.
Yeah, or I'm being smothered, or I don't like it, and then they run away. And the person who's doing it doesn't even realize that they're doing it. Makes sense? Because they're doing it to try and feel loved, or to feel secure, or to feel complete, or that type of thing. So the nice thing about frequency work is as you release your distortion patterns, you no longer have a need to do that. And so
even if you don't know you're doing it, you still won't. You'll do that less and less and less as your frequency resonance rises and as you get more internally stable and all that. You will in fact do that less, even if that behavior is unconscious. So it's not like a decision. Oh, I'm going to do it less. It's just it doesn't happen as much. Right.
Yeah, totally. What's really cool about having a relationship with somebody who has done more frequency work is the awareness that you have, because you don't let me like snuggle up with you too hard.
Well, it's true, because now that you know something, like when someone knows something is a thing, they can be on the lookout for it, right? So now that I know that it's a thing that you might like be sort of, or that I might be sort of moving beyond my own sort of sphere into yours or into someone else's and vice versa. And I kind of know what that feels like now too. So I'm like, hey, wait a minute. Even though I don't perceive in the same way you do, like with on like frequency level kind of stuff. Although I do have knowingnesses, right? Sometimes. So I'll just kind of know what's going on, even though I don't really know how I know, and I don't really perceive it in any particular way. I think some people do perceive it. Like you actually might physically or whatever, not physically, but like frequentially. You might feel it on a frequency level somehow, but I wouldn't do that. But it still doesn't mean I'm not aware that it's happening, is what I'm trying to say. For other people too, who think like, oh yeah, Karen's got special skills, but I don't really have any like special skills that are discussable or anything like that, other than like I know things sometimes, yet I can still feel it. So like if you start to know what it's like when people are getting into your space, you can start to become aware that that's happening. And not beyond just the partner, like even like in a store, even with people, your coworkers and that kind of stuff, you can just sort of start to be aware, like, oh wow, this person's really pushing into me. I'm going to be more solid.
Yeah.
And just since we kind of went on that tangent, when I first started being aware of that as a thing, I would actually have to get really, not exactly aggressive, but really like think about it in a really hard way, like bam, I'm going to set my boundaries because I don't want people coming in. And it's kind of like, as I got more and more practice at it, I don't even have to be so hard about it now. I can just be like, oh no, I'm going to push my boundary out there and that's it. I don't have to get all aggressive about it. But when I first did it, I would actually have to almost like intend it, being like, I'm going to put up my boundaries. So people might need to know that that's a way that they can do that if they haven't had a lot of practice, and they do have a lot of issues with letting people sort of not bleed into them, but like push into their space. Yeah.
And what I would say also is that as your frequency resonance rises, it's easier to actually hold your space without having to be like hard about it, as you say, right? It's not
just like natural.
It's just natural. And I think at the beginning, because you were so unpracticed at it, you had to actually do it more hard, so to speak. But as your frequency resonance rises and you gain more confidence in yourself and just your resonance, and people can't come into your space, I think you don't have to assert yourself quite in the same way. And what I think is interesting is that by holding your space, you also don't take things as personally. So for example, when you reflect back to me, like, hey, you're pushing into my space, which you will do.
Right.
I immediately check myself. So I'm not like, Chris is such a jerk. He's telling me I'm in his space. I don't know what he's talking about. I'm not. Me. And I'm so evolved, and he's not, like all that, whatever you could think, I imagine.
Right.
Really, it's more like, okay, scan.
Am I doing that?
Am I doing that? Yeah, I am. I am so sorry. And pull back. So it's a really... it's really lovely when you hold your space even more as your frequency resonance rises, because those kinds of responses are helpful. Like, I don't think of it as a negative thing when you tell me that. I think of that as a like, hey, scan yourself, check. Like, what is going on? Take responsibility for what might be happening and what this person is saying is happening, so that you can respond appropriately and take accountability for that. So I think it makes it easier to shift myself out of weird, clingy, insecure states that I might wander into occasionally, and to think, okay, well, why is this happening? Where's the distortion? Where do I need to strengthen? How do I need to shift here? So that can be a really helpful tool.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, like, even though it sounds counterintuitive, holding your space in intimate partnership is quite freeing. It actually allows for more intimacy, more connection, more depth, and more freedom for each other. And less taking what the other person does personally. Right. I would say.
For sure.
And you kind of become like partners in like a kind of like keeping not the other person in check, but like being
like accountability partners.
Yeah, accountability. Or like awareness buddies.
Awareness.
Let's call them awareness buddies. You want to call it.
This is one aspect of one's like one of the myriad different sort of facets of one's relationship. It's not just like, yay, we're going to be accountability like buddies now. You know?
And what I would say also is that one of the things that people struggle with is like if someone's like tail spinning, for example, in detox for a little bit, and it's not like a couple hours. It's now a couple of days.
Right.
And they're like kind of going through it, but they need to go through it in order to get to wherever they need to get to, in order to have the discovery that they need to have in order to rise in their frequency resonance. That can be challenging. So how would you suggest that people hold their space if that's happening?
Yeah, so I have sort of two different responses to that. So on the one hand, I feel like it's important to let people just do their thing. Like I used to, you were talking about when we were younger, and I always felt like I was responsible almost for your state, and I wanted to just fix everything. And it's like, if you weren't feeling quite right, it was like somehow I wasn't doing something well enough, or it was my responsibility to solve it. well, that's overstepping my responsibility, because it's not my responsibility to. I mean, you can be you, and you're the authority in your world. So why would I be trying to run that? So on the one hand, it's just being willing to let someone have their experience, even if it's a crappy experience. I've now realized that I'm not going to go around trying to fix everyone's world all the time. That's not my responsibility. That's meddling unless they ask for help. So number one, if you were to ask me for help, you're like, oh, I feel really crappy. Like, what do I do? Number one, for sure, then I'm going to step in and try to do what I can to help. Also, I've always found, like, when offering help, instead of insisting that I have to help, which is what I used to do, like, I'm going to help you whether you want it or not. It's like I realize that I can offer. Okay, like, I'm going to just say, hey, like, try to reflect back. Do you realize you're feeling really kind of low right now? Is there anything I can do to help out? And just give you the opportunity to say, yeah, I need some help, or this is what you can do. Because that's a really great way that everyone's involved in the solution, and no one feels like anyone's foisting anything on anyone. You know what I mean? Like, you're not being like, just leave me alone. I'm feeling this crappy state. I just want to be crappy. So I feel like being willing to watch you be in a bad state, if that's where you are, be willing to help out if you ask for it. Also, perhaps even suggest, hey, you think you're feeling kind of lousy, is it okay, like, is there anything I can do, or just to offer that as well. And then if you're just like, no, then just be willing to just let the person be.
And it's funny, it's when you say that, it sounds kind of horrible, you know. But honestly, sometimes, when you're in a bad state, right, in a bad emotional state, where you're feeling kind of crappy or whatever, and you're like, I just want to be in my bad state. You can't help me. There's nothing you can fix me. I'm just going to be here. You know how we can get sometimes? It's really bizarre. But at the same time, you're like, please, help me. Help me. Right? So, in any case, I've noticed that when you offer help, I'm like, no, I don't want it. And you hold your space, and you're neutral, and you're like, okay. I'm like, whoa. He just offered and you said no. Okay. So now you got to deal with this.
Right.
And it's kind of an interesting level of accountability for me. I'm like, you just refused someone's help who was offering truly out of wanting to help and in his neutral space. And he just, in his neutrality, just stepped out because you told him you didn't want it.
Back off.
So it's almost like it's a little bit of a it's not like you're slapping me, but it's myself slapping me. You know what I mean? Like, it's to myself. Okay, now you've put yourself here. All right, now. So
is that really what
you want to be? Like, you want to be in this little tailspin of like whatever you're doing here? So it's like a really interesting fast check, because you're not trying to make me feel better. I'm like, oh yeah, you're trying to make me feel better. I'm just going to suck you in into making me trying to make me feel better. There's no game. You're just like, all right, you do whatever you need to do over there.
That makes me think also, another thing that I can do, I mean, it's the way we're talking about this, it sounds like you're always in a crappy state. So obviously it goes in all directions, and it's like, this is something that affects all kinds of people. But another thing that I can do, if for example, you're in a bad state and you don't really want help and you are kind of being cranky, which I think actually happens probably more often in the other direction. More often I would be in that crappy state, and I'm like, I don't want help, I just feel crappy. That is something that happens sometimes. However, like, if the roles reverse and you're in that place, it is really good for me to not take things personally. Like, your rejection of my assistance isn't a rejection. It's just you're in this place where you don't want it, and that doesn't mean anything about me. So if I let myself get upset because you don't want my help, and that means you don't care about me, and like, that kind of stuff could happen, but that doesn't happen with us, and I'm really glad, because that can just ends up with both people in a downward spiral.
Yes, it's terrible.
And then where are we then? If both of us are like in response to each other, getting like down.
And that has happened a couple of times, I've noticed. Even as our frequency resonance has risen, it's like something. It hasn't happened very often, maybe twice or something, where there's something happening where we're both accelerating to another level, and we're both sort of like a little bit more unstable as a result. Make sense? So you're in a space where you're accelerating, and therefore more unstable as a result, because you're changing really fast. You haven't gotten
acclimatized to the new.
So you're not exactly like super right in your zero or anything like this. And I've noticed, like, if it's like the perfect storm, and it hasn't happened in a while, but I've seen it happen, I think twice maybe, where if you're spiraling and I'm not in my center, like, I'm not in my zero and in my neutrality, when I try to go in to assist,
you can get sucked into.
I get sucked in. And then, like you just said, it's like a tailspin, right? Now, like, both of us are like freaking disaster. We're like, like, it's worse and worse. And it's really kind of terrible, until someone somehow is like, what?
Hey,
is happening.
That's right.
We need to like center ourselves or something. That's usually what happens.
Right.
One of us will.
Well, yeah, one of us would go first and just like not worry about the other person yet. Just be like, okay, I gotta get stable myself. Okay, I got my stability back, and now like how do we work on this together or whatever? What do we do as the we now that we got the I sorted?
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like just for people to know, holding your space in intimate partnership can really be a helpful tool.
For sure.
It can really allow each of you to accelerate in the way that you need to.
Yeah.
It can be challenging. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes it can be challenging
to try to
hold your space when your partner is in detox or whatever. And in that, not only is it learning for you to hold your space, but it's a learning for them.
Yeah.
So it can be really amazing. And I would say that, you know, it's quite the opposite of what we've been taught in terms of what it means to have connection, intimacy, and truly like this celebration of getting to give love to each other in a way that both people are strong and make each other stronger.
Right. Cool.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please hit the like button and comment below and share how you've been able to hold your space in intimate partnership or why you need to. And the most important thing is to listen to the group frequency calibration associated with this episode, because in it, that's where the frequency work happens to begin to help you to hold your space in intimate relationship. We're about to start the group frequency calibration, or GFC, where we actually do the frequency work and where change is catalyzed. To get to the GFC, click on the square that'll appear to the right or the link in the description below. It's time to bring in a new experience, a new consciousness, and a new world. Let's rise together.